Welcome to today's lesson on introduction to pivot tables. So this is a data set that contains about 70 records and it includes dates, salesperson, regions, products, category, quantity, and sales amounts. So the first thing we'll do is to make sure our data is in the good format. If you see everything is bordered and is looking good now, then we convert this data into a table by pressing Ctrl T. Then we'll say my table has header, you tick it open, then okay. So now our data set is now converted. Basically looking at what we are having here, our table is complete. So what do we do now? We come to insert, then pivot table, then we are picking table 1, which is the table name. Then we want it in a new sheet, then we press okay. Having the pivot table now, if you look at this place, this becomes our field. That's what, if you look at it, those are the things we have on our columns. So now we have 4 fields here. The row does what? It determines how our data is grouped vertically. The column does group our data, allows our data to be compared horizontally, and the value is where Excel performs every calculation that are necessary, average, maximum, sum, and all of that. And filters allows us to display only selected information. So the first pivot table we'll be building is that we want to generate how, the question says how much sales did each region generate. How much sales did each region generate? So this is basically sales by region, sales by region. So our region will be dragged to our row. When you see it, so you see the row, the region is on the row, then the sales will be dragged to sales amounts, will be dragged to our values. So with this, our pivot table is completed already. So I can just format this to have a comma. Yes, format it to have a comma. I format it to have a comma. So we can see now which country, which region has the highest sales. We see that it's Lagos. This is Kano. This is, so we just can perform every several analysis here. Having done this, I can just change this place to sales by data. All right, so the next thing we'll be doing is we want to know the sales by product. So come here again, we insert our pivot table. So we want it in a new worksheet. Then we come for sales by product, right? So we come for product on the row and sales amount in the value. So we have that. This is the sales by product. So I can change that as well to sales by product. Another question has been asked. It says we want to know how much each salesperson sold. How much each salesperson sold. So insert pivot tables, then we have this, then we have salesperson as the row, then sales amount as the value. So this is the correct response for what we want to see. And we can change the name quickly. We change the name to sales person performance. So we have that on another sheet again. Discover that we now have salesperson's performance. We have salesperson also. This is by category. So the next thing we'll be moving to now is that we want to look at whereby we introduce the column. You know what we've done so far, we'll be using the row so now let's use the column. Let's insert a pivot table. So we create a new table. Yes. So now the question that is being asked here is such that we want to know the region versus the product. So the region, let's say the region becomes our row, the product becomes our column. So specifically, we know that our value is what? Our value is the sales amount. So we bring that into value. So we have Abuja keyboard. That's the sales amount for Abuja. specifically keyboard, specifically laptop, specifically monitor up to this thing, and we get the grand total. So we can easily come back and apply your border formatting and all of those things here so that it looks good, and your comma, so you can format it well for reports sake. Basically, you can rename this to sales by product and region, and you have that. And then now we'll be moving to our data. Let's come to our data sets. So what we want to do now is we insert the pivot table. So now, instead of me dragging region to rows, I drag it to filter. Then I will filter, okay, drag it to filter, then sales amount to value. So once I have this, I'll just come here in my region, filter, then filter out only Lagos. Once I filter out only Lagos, I get the sum of sales amounts for Lagos. The next thing now we are doing is we want to look at this place where we can change sum to count. So we can come to value field setting, then sum becomes count. So it is now what? Count sales amount instead of sum sales amount. We can also set it to value field, set it to average, max, average, products. We have so many functions here. So whichever function we want to use is what we set it to. Let's do max. So we have this. So whatever function we set it to in that value space is what it returns for us here. Looking at our sales by product, we discover that we have laptop as 40 million of this. So now the next thing we'll be looking at is when a data is added to the source data. So an additional data added to the source data. Let's drag this down. And this is on 15. Let's say we have James. Let's say we have Abuja instead. Then we have keyboard, that's the two boards. Then we have it as accessories. Yes, accessories, that's the, then quantity, let's say it bought 10. Then sales amount, let's say he bought, let's say that is let's just drag this down. Okay, let's have it as 300,000 naira. So if I come here to look at my salesperson by product, I should discover that this value keyboard is still remaining on 2.75 million. So what do? You refresh your pivot table. Once you do, you can see that the value has changed. So it seems whenever any sorting is added to the source data, you have to come to the pivot table to refresh it, and that is when it's going to affect on the pivot table. Do well to subscribe to our channel for more updates so that you can learn more on data analysis.